Hopefully the Guam Legislature is back in session. Before the lunch break, we were on Bill 58. Senator Tom Addy, you recognize as the main sponsor.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I move to substitute Bill number 58-34 COR with the substitute version that has been distributed to all members titled Bill number 58-34 COR as amended by the Committee on Environment, Land, Agriculture, and Procurement Reform and substituted on the floor. So that version has been distributed to all the members.
On the motion to substitute Bill 58-34 COR with the substitute version that has been distributed to all members titled Bill 58-34 COR as amended by the Committee on Environment, Land, Environment, and Procurement Reform, substituted on the floor. Is there any objection? Hearing no objection, motion carries.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, I move to place Bill 58-34 COR as amended by the Committee on Environment, Land, Agriculture, and Procurement Reform and substituted on the floor into the third reading file, and I would like to discuss it.
Hearing no objection.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, the intent of Bill 58-34 that we are discussing is twofold. One, it redirects efforts to construct a new Simon Sanchez High School based on the experience with the project over the past 36 months. And I will outline that experience as we go along here. And the second intent of Bill 58 is to construct a new Simon Sanchez High School at minimal cost. Now, I would like to give just a little bit of background on this project to construct a new Simon Sanchez High School to put things into the proper context. So it all goes back, the project to construct a new Simon Sanchez High School facility goes back to the enactment of Public Law 32-120, which was enacted in February 10th of 2014. In that particular law, the findings that was pointed out in Public Law 32-120, it acknowledges that the combined deficiencies at Simon Sanchez High School impair the quality of teaching and learning and contribute to health and safety problems for staff and students. So this particular finding, I would say, certainly points to the element of urgency. We've got to get it done, and done soon. Now, the Public Law 32-120 required that an request for proposal, an RFP, is to be issued within 30 days from enactment. So since February of 2014, 3 versions of requests for proposals have been issued. RFP version 1 was issued on June 2014. That got canceled. RFP version 2 was issued in June 2015. That got protested and it got canceled. RFP version 3.0 was issued in January of 2017. It has been protested and it is currently under appeal at the OPA. Now, just last week, they had a hearing at the OPA, and the OPA right now is considering whether to dismiss the appeal or whether to go forward with a full-blown hearing, which could take up to 30, possibly 60 days. So that's going to be further delays with this project. Now, some of the particulars of the bill, of the public law, which authorized the construction of the Simon Sanchez High School are as follows. One, the contractor is expected to deliver a finished Simon Sanchez High School within 2 years from award of the contract. And that high school, in addition to a new structure, is also to be provided and outfitted with the necessary equipment and furniture in it. It authorizes the government to enter into a 30-year leaseback of the facility. In other words, the Gov Guam guarantees to be a tenant for up to 30 years. This facility, of course, has in mind that it will be a finance, design, build, and maintain arrangement. So in other words, a bidder who submits an offer must be able to go out there and get the financing for the school, design the school, build it, and then over the next 30 years provide the capital maintenance to it. The public law also prescribes the use of the request for proposal solicitation method. The request for proposal versus the invitation for bid versus any other kind of solicitation method. The Department of Public Works is to be in charge of the procurement, and the superintendent for the Guam Department of Education will be the chairman for the selection committee. So Department of Public Works would put together the solicitation package, issue it, and then when it receives it, it will provide that package to the selection committee that is made up from heads of several different departments, and they will evaluate it for the most qualified offerer. The project value that's envisioned will be limited to about $95 million. That $95 million is based on, given the fact that there's only going to be approximately $6 million of funds that's going to be set aside to pay for the annual rental rates, one can go out and basically with that amount go out and be able to get a loan for about $95 million. So it's we know how much we're willing to pay annually to the contractor, to the landlord, and so the contractor, the landlord, has to basically gauge himself on how big or how expensive a facility he will provide. Now, it's important that I also speak a little bit about a bill that was introduced in the 33rd Legislature, which attempted to change the solicitation method. And unfortunately, it got vetoed. So in December 14, 2016, Bill 411-33 was introduced. And with that bill, it required the use of the multi-step bid under the invitation for bid method, instead of the request for proposal. And also, Bill 411 clarified the basis for the award of the contract. The legislature passed the bill by a vote of 12-2 on December 30th, 2016, and on January 6, 2017, the governor vetoed the bill, which of course, by that time, there was no recourse for an override. Now, the following are the objections to that bill, to that attempt to change the solicitation method. And I think that speaking briefly on what these objections were, it's important. So first of all, in the governor's veto message, I will highlight the two major reasons that he pointed out. He said, the request for proposal method is a proper method, solicitation method for this project. And he justified that statement by saying the OPA made no finding that the RFP was not a proper procurement vehicle. Well, proper or not, Public Law 32-120 directed, prescribed, mandated that the RFP solicitation method will be used. The other objection that the governor had was that in Bill 411 mandated or proposed that the multi-step bid will be utilized as opposed to the RFP method. The governor came back and his objection was that that is a violation of the separation of powers doctrine. He states specifically, Bill 411 violates the separation of powers doctrine and is therefore inorganic and unconstitutional. So if we're going to take that kind of logic then, in that case, Public Law 32-120 will then also be inorganic and unconstitutional because it mandates a specific solicitation method, the request for a proposal. And I will show how in Bill 58 we will address that dilemma. So he says, don't tell me that I have to use the multi-step bid, but it's okay to do it in Public Law 32-120. He goes on to say, Bill 411 usurps the DPW director's duty as the central procurement officer of the territory with respect to construction and his executive discretion to select the method of construction contracting by ordering DPW and GDOE to use only a multi-step competitive sealed bid method and no other. Well, if one goes to the procurement law, Guam procurement law, section 5210 states specifically, unless authorized by law, all territorial contracts shall be awarded by competitive seal bidding. Now, it's important that we also note what DOE's objections were. And according to the governor's veto message, his veto of the bill was also prompted by the objections raised by GDOE. So GDOE's reasons for asking the governor to veto the bill were as follows. One, cost should not be the sole determining factor. That was a reason cited by GDOE as to why the governor should veto the bill. Well, cost should not be the sole determining factor. Well, I suggest that at a time when GovGuam has limited financial resources, cost needs to be an important factor. When a difference of as much as $25 million between the top two offerers involved, a closer look is then warranted. And this is a good example of where the solicitation method used makes a difference. Making sure that we accomplish the construction of Simon Sanchez High School is very important. So I will submit to you that that certainly to make the statement that cost should not be the sole determining factor, especially when we know that 5 years ago it was estimated that the cost just to rehabilitate the 35 schools that we have is going to cost approximately $139 million. Today, that amount is probably in the upwards of the high hundreds. And so cost is very important. The second reason that GDOE cited as to why the governor should veto the bill They state, GDOE should be afforded the opportunity to negotiate with the vendor once it is awarded so that we can clarify and confirm with them exactly what is best for our students. Now that seems to be a little backwards, because it would seem that clarifications and confirmations should be completed before an award is made. If we do it the other way around, for sure, procurement protests will be filed and further delays will occur. A third reason that DOE made is that the procurement team has gone through the entire RFP process already, and it is better positioned and ready to move forward with the process this second time around. The experience from the first go-around would ensure that GDOE completes the procurement in an expedited manner. So I guess in so many words, to me what that says is practice makes perfect. So maybe we should continue using whatever method we're using now, and eventually, one of these days, we're going to get it right. Well, this procurement has been protested a number of times. It is now before the OPA a second time. I say enough is enough. Let's change our course direction here. Finally, GDOE says, the invitation for bid, and specifically the multi-step bid, is a new procurement method. And it requires a new method, and requiring a new method would require a substantial learning curve for everyone involved. Well, first of all, the method is well established in Guam law and in the administrative regulations. And secondly, this invitation for bid method certainly affords greater participation by the offerers up to the end. So this document here represents what the request for proposal is that was distributed out by the Department of Public Works. So let me break it down for you a little bit. This part of the RFP contains nothing more than basically copies of Public Law 32-120 and another law, and it provides a copy of the Department of Interior's assessment of our public schools. Whether you use an RFP or an IFB, doesn't matter. This doesn't change. So now we're down to this. This part of the RFP is basically administrative stuff. It's affidavits, pre-printed forms of what has to be filled out, that there's no collusion, and all that stuff. And then it lists basically what the wages are that are normally paid to the various workers in the construction industry. So this doesn't change either, whether it's an IFB or an RFP. So now we're left with this. This part of the RFP is Exhibit A. The Exhibit A was passed out to the members as part of this. And what this is actually the specifications of what DOE identified it needed for its schools. Now, of course, this is where some of the controversy has been. It says, DPW says, well, these aren't really specifications, these are considerations. Well, so when you read through it, it says, the facility must meet all ADA compliant regulations and applicable local and federal codes and regulations. That is not a consideration. That is a specification. That is a requirement that our facilities be ADA compliant. It says you need to have a capacity for 2,300 students. That's not a consideration, that's a specification. And then it goes on to tell you in Exhibit A how many classrooms are needed, how many laboratories are needed, the square footage, what kind of furniture has to be in it, and that the furniture has to be compliant with, there's a certain standard that is followed for school furniture. So this is not going to change either, regardless of whether it's an IFB or an RFP. All right? Regardless of which way you go, you need to build a school to be able to house 2,300 students. I need 122 classrooms. It's got to be ADA compliant. It's got to have a courtyard, etc. So really, what's left out of that 2-inch thick RFP? Really, it's just a small piece here. A lot of the pages are pages right out of the administrative regulations in our law books that says you got to have this provision, that provision, et cetera, et cetera. And the only thing it really comes down to is maybe 5 pages at the most, which outlines the rules of engagement under the IFB. So, so that's the RFP, and I point this out simply because one of the objections is that, oh, we have to start all over again, you know, back to square one. No, we don't. We're going to delay it for months. No, we don't, because a lot of the things don't change regardless of the solicitation method. What changes is that under the RFP method, assuming that everybody has been determined to be responsible, that in fact they responsible, that they have the capacity to do the work, they can get the financing, they have the expertise, etc., and that they have been determined to be responsive, that in their proposal, yes, we will provide you 122 classrooms. We will provide and design a school that has the capacity for 2,300 students. Assuming that all the offerers can meet that, with an RFP, the offerers are ranked based on certain criteria, which again is provided to you. And basically what that criteria is financing capability, project expertise and experience, project approach and innovation, and comprehensive capital improvement plan. And the way it works is that after they do the evaluation of each of the proposals that have been received, they rank them as number 1, 2, or 3. And then under the RFP, we invite in the offerer with a proposal that's ranked as number 1. Never mind all the other offers. We don't even know what they might be able to offer. So we sit down with the guy that's ranked number 1, and basically, in reality, what it works is the guy comes in and he says, I know how much you got in your pocket. I'll build you a school for what you got in your pocket. Then that's when we sit down and negotiate and say, no, what would it cost, or how much will you reduce the price if we eliminate this feature or whatever, okay? And then if they are not able to negotiate successfully, we say thank you, goodbye, and we call in number 2. And that basically, in the case of the Simon Sanchez High School, we never got to number 2 or number 3. We just brought in number 1, and we sat down, and they came up, says our price is $85 million. Now, if we went the invitation for bid method, the same things happen. They submit their proposals. They're determined to be responsive and responsible, and they each specify that how they're going to get the financing. They specify what their approach is to the design and all that, and provided that they all provide offers that are pretty much the same, then they also get rated. So let's say you got 10 submittals. So DPW could say, okay, the top 3. You top 3 that have submitted your offers, submit a second envelope that has your price of how much it's going to cost you to build and provide the facility that we want. And then we open that second envelope, and it's the offerer that provides the lowest price will then get awarded. And that's where competition comes in, because each offerer is going to submit a price that's as low as he can get it to be able to pay for his costs and still provide himself a profit margin. Of course, now, the guy who can't go out and get a good interest rate on his loan, the guy who wants a 25% profit margin, the guy who wants, as much as he can get, he's probably not going to prevail. So, what does Bill 58 do? It does 5 things very simply. 1, if you look through the bill, it removes any reference to the request for proposal method. In fact, it does not even make a reference to the request for proposal or the invitation for bid. It simply says on page 3, section 2, it simply says on line 25, the government of Guam or an education agency shall solicit through the Department of Public Works, because they are the ones who are responsible when it comes to construction, in compliance with the Guam procurement law, for the renovation or construction of the education facility under a 30-year leaseback arrangement. So, it removes any reference to a specific method of solicitation, simply requires that the procurement law be followed. And the procurement law says that unless authorized by law, which already in the governor's veto message said, don't tell me what method to use. Don't tell me to use the multi-step bid. Don't tell me, then in that case, we shouldn't tell you to use the request for proposal. So we delete that, and you follow the law, and it says for construction, you have to use the invitation for bid. Now, are we going to declare the Guam procurement law as being inorganic or unconstitutional because it tells you to do that? I don't think so. The second thing that Bill 58 does is it clarifies, it makes it more clear what is being solicited and is the basis for an award. 1, we are soliciting for a high school facility that according to specifications provided by DOE. Those specifications is provided in Exhibit A that is made a part of the solicitation package. And it says that there will be a leaseback period. Now, in all that, all we're saying is, I don't care where you borrow the money from. You can put 30 professional engineer, licensed designers and whatnot to design the school. How you do that? Provide me a school facility that is compliant with Guam's building codes and that complies with federal regulations with respect to the American Disabilities Act and all that. So 1, provide me that facility. 2, I will guarantee you that I will be your tenant for the next 30 years. The third thing that Bill 58 does is that it states specifically that an award will be made to the offerer which provides for the lowest annual leaseback rate. It's not going to be given to the guy who can get the lowest interest rate on a loan. It's going to provide the guy, we're going to award it to the guy to the contractor that will charge the lowest annual leaseback rate. The fourth thing that the bill does, so first of all, on page 4, line 20, it states specifically, the award of the contract shall be based upon the offer submitted by a responsible offerer that is responsive to the solicitation and offers the lowest annual leaseback rate inclusive of insurance and maintenance costs to the government for a fixed 30-year term. The fourth thing that Bill 58 does, and what's been really complicating this solicitation, is that we're trying to in one shot solve the problems of all the school facilities here on Guam. So we want to build Simon Sanchez High School, and at the time we want to also rehabilitate 34 other school facilities, and pretty soon we don't know what are we chasing after. And so what Bill 58 does is it says that the rehabilitation of 34 other schools will not be a part of the Simon Sanchez High School solicitation. And that is compliant with Public Law 132-121. And if you take a look at that law, it states specifically, and it deals with the 34 other schools that need to be rehabilitated. But no, in the rush to try and be as efficient as possible, we're trying to merge everything together, and it's just convoluting everything. And as a result, here we are 3 years later, and we haven't gotten anywhere. Finally, Bill 58 says there will be no rental payments made until full occupancy permit has been received and GDOE has accepted the facility. So, in other words, you know, you may have 121 of the 122 classrooms that we need. You can have it all completed. You can have the occupancy permit issue for that. But if I don't get that last one, the 122nd classroom, then no rent is to be paid until that is made available. So that is what Bill 58-34 does. And I ask my colleagues to carefully consider this and to support it, because we've got to move this effort forward, and we're just not getting close to it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Senator Adams, for that very comprehensive explanation of Bill 58. Any other senator wish to be heard on the main motion? Senator Torres? Any other senator after Senator Torres? Senator Snoggassy? Okay, Senator Torres, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I commend the author of this piece of legislation. I commend him for his efforts both in this legislative term and in legislative terms past, in his efforts to work on procurement reform, to work on long-standing and pressing issues that have come in the way of getting sound procurement awarded in our government process. We are all very concerned about the state of Simon Sanchez High School and the lack of any improvements on the facility in 4 years. In looking at the committee report, this effort was started with a public law around 2014, an award of an RFP in 2015, which was subsequently protested and canceled, a second award that was RFP that was issued in 2017, and again protested in 2017, February. I do not object to the efforts of this bill. I commend the author for trying to find a solution to what has just been one of the most frustrating processes for the students affected and also for the contractors who have been bidding on this process. Those who were awarded it prospectively and those who lost the request for proposal. But what concerns me, and I want to pose this question to the author, as I contemplate the statement made that we are currently, there's a protest currently with, I'm sorry, the award of this is under protest right now with the appeal with the Office of the Public Accountability, and there was a hearing just last week, if I recall the statement. So the question that I would like to pose to the author is, given that this is an open matter that is under appeal, would the introduction of a bill at this time, while there is an ongoing appeal process, would passing such legislation at this time open the government of Guam up to any sort of liability insofar as interfering with ongoing processes in the procurement process or in impairing an obligation of contracts that are currently in place? We sometimes wonder with legislative intent when we start to enact legislation if it can be perceived as a way of thwarting a process that is lawfully in place. And that is just my one concern. I'm sorry, my one concern that I'd like to pose to the author, if I may.
Senator Adder, do you yield to that question?
Yes, Mr. Speaker. Now the question is, will the introduction of this bill or the passage of it affect a solicitation that is currently in progress? And the answer to that is no. One, in the procurement law, it says that Department of Public Works can cancel in whole or in part a solicitation at any time for its convenience, or for, it states about 3 different reasons. So you find that in the Guam procurement law. They also, DPW also cites that in its request for proposal, saying that it can cancel this proposal at any time that it deems in the best to be in the best interest of the territory. And thirdly, it has demonstrated that it can do that when it canceled the RFP version 2. When it got protested, when version 2 got protested, it got appealed, and the OPA basically said, Department of Public Works, you have 2 choices. Either you go and you make all these changes to correct the problems, or you can just cancel it and start all over. They canceled it. And that's how we came up with RFP version 3. So I hope that satisfactorily answers the question.
Thank you very much, Senator. Senator Torres, is that satisfactory, and do you have any further concerns?
If I might be able to consult with legal counsel, because I think the difference between that explanation and my concern has to do with the legislature's imposition into the process at this point. And that's my concern, is where the DPW does have discretion, it's a little bit of a different scenario here, because now we're interjecting something that would cause them to pull it back, as opposed to them just doing it on their own accord. And it's the influence of the body that I'm just, in an abundance of caution, I'm just confused about still. So if I may, perhaps...
I'd be willing to call a short recess for you to have the ability to be able to speak to legal counsel.
I appreciate that, Mr.
We'll take a short
Speaker.
recess. Legislature's back in session. Before we broke, I believe we were with Senator Torres. Senator Torres, do you still wish any additional time, or are you satisfied with the advice that you've been provided?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I do not require additional time. I did have the opportunity to confer with my colleagues as well as with legal counsel, and based on our discussions, I do not have any objections or any further concerns with regard to the timing of this bill. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any other senator wish to be heard on this? Senator San Nicolas and then Senator San Augustine.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I too would like to commend the author. He's made multiple efforts to try and improve this process. Those efforts have been vetoed on several occasions, and this process has not moved forward. I sit back and I wonder if his work was just allowed to proceed when it was initiated, would we even be here today? But here we are. And in his opening statement, he elaborated very, very clearly his full understanding of not only the circumstances surrounding the introduction of this bill, but the problems that are stymieing it. And once again, he has made quite an effort to move this project forward. In consultation with the author, I just wanted perhaps even legal counsel's eye on something that I just wanted to make sure was tightened. On page 4, lines 20, extending into page 5 to line 2. So when I'm reading this particular paragraph, it starts out by saying in the first sentence, the award of the contract shall be based upon the offer submitted by a responsible offerer that is responsive to the solicitation and offers the lowest annual leaseback rate inclusive of insurance and maintenance costs to the government of Guam for a fixed 30-year term, period. Now that first sentence basically spells out what the award of the contract can be based on. And the way I interpret that is that it can be based on the lowest leaseback rate, with that leaseback rate being factored according to an analysis of just the insurance and maintenance costs of the project. Now in the second sentence, it does create a requirement for the offer to submit a complete breakdown of its project costs. But that second sentence is just a requirement to submit a breakdown. It isn't necessarily the threshold by which the contract is to be offered. That threshold is specifically stated in that first sentence, which is 1, the lowest leaseback rate, inclusive of only the insurance and maintenance costs. And so I'm wondering, and perhaps legal counsel can provide the guidance, do we need to restructure that first sentence so that the award of the contract shall be based upon the offer submitted by a responsible offerer that is responsive to the solicitation and offers the lowest annual project cost, perhaps, with project cost to include, at a minimum, 1, construction costs, 2, soft costs including management, development, other related project fees, and 3, the annual lease payment schedule identifying any financing, insurance, and maintenance costs and terms.
Senator, do you yield to the question? Do you understand the question, and are you willing to yield?
Well, actually, what was intended was that the award is going to be based on providing a facility that meets specs, and 2, offers the lowest annual leaseback rate, not project cost. So how much it costs you to build is really irrelevant in my mind, because all I want is a building which meets certain specifications, and in return I will pay you back the required rental rate annually. And that rental rate should include, when you break it down, includes the insurance costs, the projected capital maintenance costs, and the well, I guess you could put financing, but really what's the variable there, that the benefit that I'm looking for is the insurance and the maintenance. So it's got to be reflecting and offers the lowest annual leaseback rate or the lowest annual rent.
Is that satisfactory, Senator Nicholas?
Well, let me just explain how this potential scenario can play out then, given if we were to maintain the status quo language, my interpretation, and again, I'm just one guy in here, but my interpretation would be the award of the contract must be submitted by a responsible offeror and is responsive to the solicitation, so that does include the project, and offers the lowest annual leaseback rate inclusive of insurance and maintenance costs. So let's say that they provide a proposal or a bid, and the bid includes the insurance and maintenance costs, but separately they have a separate charge for the financing. Because we didn't, for example, put financing in here, would they be able to award just because the insurance and maintenance cost component of that leaseback rate was the lowest and the financing cost comes in as a separate item? I'm just being very thorough because it's the absence of, that's what's kind of caused our issues today, so I just wanted to raise the question, Mr. Speaker.
Senator San Nicolas, is that a question you're posing to the author?
It's a question I'd like to pose to the body. The author he has provided an answer as well, but I'm seeking the body's guidance.
Senator Ada, do you yield to that question?
I didn't hear the question.
Madam Speaker, I'd like to request a 5-minute recess.
All right,
Yeah.
5-minute recess.
you guys? Before the recess, Senator Nicholas have the floor. Senator Nicholas, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In consultation once again of the body and with legal counsel, I do have a recommended amendment I'd like to proffer on page 4. This will involve page 4, lines 20 through page 5, line 2.
Okay.
First, I guess we will I'll just take it one step at a time. On line 21, strike the word the, replace it with a. And add the word responsive before the word offer. And the reason I'm making that amendment, Mr. Speaker, is because that would match the definition on page 3, line 7 to 13. So strike the word the, replace it with the word a, and before the word offer, put responsive. So it will read, the award of the contract shall be based upon a responsive offer.
On that amendment, on the Nicholas amendment to page Senator Espadon.
I'm sorry, Mr. Speaker. If the mover of the amendment could just restate the page and the line.
Amendment is being proffered on page 4, line 21.
21.
And it's to add the word responsive before the word offer. And the reason why is because responsive offer is specifically defined in the bill on page 3, line 7.
Replace the word.
No, insert the word responsive and delete the word or delete the word the and put responsive.
I must be looking at a different bill.
Page 4, lines 20 to 21 will read, the award of the contract shall be based upon a responsive offer.
Oh. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much, Senator Espadon. You still have the floor.
On that first amendment, Mr. Speaker?
On that amendment, any objection? You may continue.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Now, because we've made it very clear that the award of the contract shall be based upon a responsive offer, and that a responsive offer is defined on page 3, lines 7 to 13, I would like to proffer an amendment on page 3, lines 7 to 13.
Please.
The amendment that I'd like to proffer, Mr. Speaker, and perhaps legal counsel can assist in the structuring of the language, but I'm looking to include under responsive offer the requirement that a responsive offer is inclusive of the list of items on page 4, starting on line 26 through page 5, ending on line 2. So responsive offer is one that includes hard construction costs, 2 soft costs including management, development, and other related project fees, and 3, the annual lease payment schedule identifying any finance, insurance, and maintenance costs and terms. That will be added at the end of line 13 on page 3.
On that Nicholas amendment, any senator wish to be heard? Any senator wish to have any objections to it? Seeing no hands go up to speak or no one indicating any objection.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So now the award of the contract shall be based upon a responsive offer. A responsive offer must include hard construction costs, soft costs including management, development, other related project fees, and 3, the annual lease payment schedule identifying any finance, insurance, and maintenance costs and terms. So with that, Mr. Speaker, I would like to make a motion to strike on page 4, line 23, starting with the word inclusive, and ending on line 24 at the word cost, because now that's been part of the definition. So it would read, and offers the lowest annual leaseback rate to the government of Guam for a fixed 30-year term. So strike inclusive of insurance and maintenance costs.
On that Nicholas amendment, any senator wish to be heard? Any objection to the amendment? Madam Vice Speaker? Do you have any objections? No? There being no objection? Any objections? Hearing or seeing?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And lastly, after line 25, after the word term, starting with the word each, we can go ahead and strike that language now, going all the way to page 5, line 2. Because that's been added to the definition now of responsive offer. Page 4, line 25, starting with the word each offer, we can strike all of that all the way to page 5, line 2.
Does everybody follow this, the proposed amendment? Starting on line 25 to line 2, to strike. Any senator wish to be heard on that amendment? Any objection to the amendment? If not,
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And so just to now read the new paragraph starting on line 20, it should read, the award of the contract shall be based upon a responsive offer submitted by a responsible offerer that is responsive to the solicitation and offers the lowest annual leaseback rate to the government of Guam for a fixed 30-year term.
is everybody clear on that? All right, thank you. Anything further?
I guess not, Mr. Speaker. Thank you very much.
You can? No? Senator Augustine.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to thank the author for his bill. The only thing I have is I request an amendment. Well, actually, to ask the author, where's the $95 million that he stated earlier for the cost of the bill? And the only reason why I asked that, because during the hearing, it didn't reach that much, $95 million in the packet. And I did introduce a bill 19 that was heard in his committee on March 31st that identified $75 million as a limit for Simon Sanchez. And that would be my motion, but I'd like to first ask, where's the $95 million bill on Simon Sanchez on this bill? Senator Adams?
Do you yield?
So, Mr. Speaker, the $95 million figure that I quoted came from information that was provided in the RFP version 3, the one that's currently in play. And in that RFP, they mentioned that the sum, they were talking about basically where these sources of funding are coming from. So in the RFP, if you want to get a copy of the RFP, it's on page 27, paragraph 4.5.2, paragraph 2, it says, the sum of $1,200,000 from revenue received pursuant to section section 22, 425, Q5, etc., will be available annually beginning fiscal year 2016. This statute is available on the World Wide Web. Then it also says, so that's 1.2. Then it says the sum of $4,800,000 will be available beginning in FY 2019 upon the maturity of the Bond Series 2013C. So whatever that annual debt service is, once that bond is paid off, then they're going to earmark $4.8 million. So those two then comes up to $6 million. So you just kind of work backwards, and again, it's not a precise, but I think it's an accurate enough figure that if you had an annual amount of $6 million to service a debt, then that's going to be payable for over a 30-year period at assuming a 4.5% interest rate. You could probably borrow up to $95 million. Of course, if the interest rate is higher, then it's going to be less. So that's one source. I know that in the RFP that DPW, the current RFP in play, they make mention to a $100 million bond or $100 million cost a ceiling on any kind of financing. In fact, on section 4-A of the current RFP, it says the scope of work for this RFP includes financing and lease financing for rehabilitation, construction, etc. of 35 schools with a total of cost up to $100 million. So, you know, we're in the range of about $90 to $100 million of what's being looked at for, you know, to build Simon Sanchez and rehabilitate 34 other schools. So that's where the figure comes from.
Okay, so,
Does that answer the question, Senator Augustine?
well, you know, as he mentioned, the $95 million, in the spirit of Public Law 32-120, it talks about $100 million to take care of Simon Sanchez and 34 other schools. When I introduced Bill 19 back then, it talked about putting a cap. With his bill, I'm asking that, make a motion that we introduce a cap of $75 million for the building of Simon Sanchez so that there will be, hopefully, some money left over to take care of the other schools.
And I guess I would have to object to that for these reasons. One, if we put a cap, let's say $75 million, because we're thinking that we want to have some money available left for the 34 other schools. Now, and then when we go out to the market, right, or when the prospective bidders start, you know, computing how much it's going to cost, let's face it, with the situation that we have right now with H-2 labor, the cost of labor is probably increased by 25 to 30% with what's going, you know, so I'm afraid that if we're going to say you're only going to have $75 million to build a school, well, we really don't know if 75, what if it comes up to $80 million? So now we're going to have to come back in here and, you know, go through all this gyration to now reauthorize a new ceiling, as opposed to simply saying, and keeping our eye on the ball. Right now, the objective should be rebuild Simon Sanchez High School. Just, you know, dissociate from anything else. Build me a high school, and you only have available $6 million a year for rental payment of that facility. But you know, that's what's kind of convoluting everything right now, is we're trying to build a school, we're trying to rehabilitate 34 schools. In the end, it just gets so convoluted. We haven't, 3 years we haven't done and moved.
Thank you very much. Senator Sin Augustine, are you
Senator,
going to make your motion to make the amendment, or has Senator Ada addressed your
well, you know,
possible amendment?
Mr. Speaker, I thank the author for the bill, because I'm from Jigo. I would love to see Simon Sanchez, but there's 34 other schools, and I still make that motion. I'd like to be heard on the floor if they want to vote on it.
All right. I guess we'll have legal counsel find a place for it. There is a motion by Senator Sin Augustine to put a cap of $75 million on this project. On the Sin Augustine amendment, any senator wish to be heard? We've already heard, unless you want to speak again completely on the amendment. Since Senator Ada, Madam Vice Speaker, you're next. Any other senator wish to be heard on the Sin Augustine amendment, placing a $75 million cap on the Simon Sanchez project? Madam Vice Speaker, did your hand go up or no? Oh, you're recognized.
Thank you. On the 75 million, I didn't hear, is it available? Where does that number come from?
Mr. Speaker, the 75 million was when I first introduced Bill 19, but also when you look at all the bids from the previous bids that was awarded, it was as low as 63 and as high as 89 or $83 million. We were using 75 because that was what the intent was in the spirit of Public Law 32-120, that there approximately be $25 million available, and I've got that information from the GITA themselves.
Thank you. Madam Vice Speaker, is that sufficient, or? Do you have any further comment on the
I'm
amendment?
trying to recall the testimony on that bill where we that described setting a cap at 75, and if there was any objection to that as the cap. I can't remember DPW's testimony on that. I'm trying to.
There was never a hearing on his 19. Or there was there?
Mr. Speaker, the hearing was on March 31st at 2 p.m.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry.
And those issues that identified about the 75 million, and also I addressed the IDIQ and also the best value or the lowest price. That was where the discussion, and I didn't really hear many objections other than from Public Works, 75 million. And I beg pardon?
Okay.
May I ask the DPW's objection to the 75 million then?
It's more the restriction because of the ability to go up higher if the offer was offered. Exactly what Senator Ada brought up.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. Any other senator wish to be heard? Any other senator wish to be heard? Senator Espaldon.
This motion is coming out at this time, and again, I'm trying to do the analysis in my head, but then I guess the first thing that pops in my mind is if we include that amendment into this bill, does that make that amendment, does it render the bill materially different from what it is right now?
I don't believe so. I mean, they did place a cap. It's been discussed, but I'd be willing to be challenged if anybody wants to. There was an objection, and so it will take 8 votes to include the amendment.
Okay.
It would have to be passed before you could make the motion that it was materially different and ask that it be sent back.
I guess is that I appreciate the move of the amendment's point, right? But I also appreciate the author of this bill's perspective. And I guess in my mind, my mind might work a little slower than most, but to be able to really try to fathom it, perhaps if I could call them and ask for at least 1 or 2 minutes to really think this one through. If it's not
Well,
necessary,
no. We'll take a short recess, and you can discuss it with others.
thank you.
Legislature's back in session. When we broke, Senator Espadón, you have the floor. You're recognized.
No, I just want to thank you for that little bit of time to be able to discuss with some of my colleagues the ramifications of that motion. But thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. Any other senator wish to be heard on the main motion? Well, yeah, okay. Or was there an amendment? Oh, I'm sorry, Senator San Augustine's cap, that's right. I apologize. On the San Augustine amendment for a $75 million cap, anyone wish to be heard? Senator Rodriguez.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I rise in support of the amendment of Senator San Augustine on putting a cap on what we need to spend for Simon Sanchez. If I had it my way, I would actually even lower down that amount, because if you look at what the proposals that came in, there's as low as 63 million, as high as 89. And it should be us driving what the cost would be on what it's going to take to build Sanchez finally. I think what we're seeing here is a system that is, it's not in our favor. It's not in the best interest of our kids, the students of Simon Sanchez, and that's why we're seeing this continued delay. And so I just rise in support. It's a good effort to ensure that we drive what it's going to cost to build Simon Sanchez. So I rise in support of this amendment.
Thank you very much. On the San Augustine amendment, any other senator wish to be heard? Any other senator wish to be heard on the San Augustine amendment? If not, Senator San Augustine, you may close on your amendment.
Mr. Speaker, I don't know much more to say, but 75 million I think would work for Simon Sanchez, and we'll be able to address the other schools. Thank you.
Thank you. Did I understand, Senator Adda, that you indicated an objection to the amendment? There being an objection to the amendment, all those in favor of the San Augustine amendment, please indicate by raising your right hand. Motion fails. On the main motion, any other senator wish to be heard? Senator Rodriguez.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. First of all, I want to echo the sentiments of our colleagues who have rose and commended the author. And I too commend the author for doing all that we could to kind of correct this procurement process. I just don't have faith, Mr. Speaker, I have faith in the author and his efforts and our efforts to try to resolve some of the things we think are the problems. I just don't have faith in the process, the procurement process that we have. And I know that's a very strong statement coming from this body. But when we've waited year after year after year to finally get the facility up at Simon Sanchez rebuilt, and we can't do it because of the protests that are being filed, I don't have faith in that process. And perhaps it's time that we look at an alternative, something to think outside the box in getting that school finally built for the sake of our students. Mr. Speaker, I want to read a paragraph here from a testimony from DPW, from the DPW Deputy Director on Bill 58. And this, I'll read, it says, "The delays have been the result of procurement protests filed. These protests are legally allowed by the Guam procurement law. We remind that this single procurement is one of the largest ever in Guam history, and intense scrutiny is rightfully expected. There are very high stakes here for all participants and beneficiaries. Amending Public Law 32-120 with Bill 58-34 or any of the past, pending, and future attempts to amend it does not assure the legislature, the students, staff, and faculty of Simon Sanchez High School and the public that protests will not be filed, as is the right of the unsuccessful offerer. That statement, Mr. Speaker, drives me to feel the way I feel about I just don't have faith in the whole process. And the deputy director is right. There are high stakes here. Depending on who you talk to, Mr. Speaker, who are the high stakes? What are these high stakes? Is it high stakes for the parties that are involved here that stand to benefit greatly in profits from the building of Simon Sanchez? Or should it be the high stakes for our students at Simon Sanchez that need and deserve a facility that is conducive to learning, that is safe, that the environment is safe for them, for the teachers at Simon Sanchez? So, I'm not sure, Mr. Speaker, if supporting this measure is going to solve this problem that we have with the protests. I really have not decided on how I'm going to vote on this piece of legislation, but I just want our body to be able to start to look at perhaps other alternatives to get this government, to get us out of this procurement mess that really is a mess. I mean, we've looked at the numbers that came in from the three bidders, from a high of 89 million to a low of 63 million. There's something wrong with that picture for me, Mr. Speaker, especially when the government goes out and awards it to the highest bidder. There's something clearly wrong with that picture. And based on the objections of Public Works with this measure, based on the objections of third parties that have stated in the media that they oppose this measure, we're setting ourselves up to end up in the same place we are today with another protest being filed. And so I'm frustrated, Mr. Speaker, and that's why I struggle to be able to articulate what I believe I should be on this bill. I'm just frustrated that it's taking this long, and the center of all this is not the students. The procurement, the protest that we've been seeing is not centered on what's best for the students. And so I just wish to be able to state my position on the record and ask my colleagues to start looking at alternatives to getting Simon Sanchez built. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you very much, Senator Rodriguez. On the main motion, any other senator wish to be heard? Madam Vice Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise in support of this bill, and I commend the author also for his efforts and on all the efforts of this body really to get the Simon Sanchez High School completed and at the best value for the government of Guam. I think what this bill does is it makes it adds more specifics to the project as opposed to the so many variables that were allowed in past procurement, and I'm hoping that is going to decrease the time that it's going to take us to get the quotes or the offers rather, and it also makes very specific on page 4. It specifies that the solicitation shall specifically state the minimum specifications that will be required for a submitted proposal to be considered. This is a huge difference, this one line, compared to all the other the other process that we were using. The other process, we were requesting proposals, and they differed in so many ways, in design, in price, in what's included, not included. And so I'm hoping that especially this language is really going to bring us a long ways in getting this school completed as soon as possible. The decrease in variables also should help us. I mean, we don't need to negotiate. And I think it's going to bring more fairness and more competition, because by telling them exactly what we want, they will be able to just compete exactly on those terms. And the government can get exactly what it wants. And this is another one of my concerns, and I'm not even sure if this bill completely addresses it, that we've seen our schools built, and the beautiful, like Ukudu is an example. When it was built, it was beautiful. It's brand new, it's beautiful, but I remember we couldn't use the track. The track was not built correctly or to specs, or the specs did not include that it has to be, regulation or something. And so my concern in this whole process is that I really want it to be a school that DOE, and as the preceding speaker said, that the students can use, and that DOE really signs off on these specifications. Now, we don't attach the specifications, and I know that they have attached Exhibit A. Well, Exhibit A is attached to this bill, but it's really not referred to in this bill, and that's maybe a question that I have is, are we passing a bill with an attachment, but the attachment is not referred to in this bill at all? And, but I would ask that, I hope that DPW will require DOE to sign off on these specifications so that they can't later tell us this is not the school that they wanted, or we wasted our money because it's not that usable for them. That type of thing. I mean, obviously, we want the schools to be what DOE wants, but for some reason, that's not always what we seem to be getting. So I just want, if we are going to use Exhibit A as the minimum specs or some version of Exhibit A, that it be something that DOE absolutely signs off on. And I know that there has to be a little bit of back and forth between DOE and DPW, because DOE might ask for something that exceeds even the $100 million price tag. And so DPW, GITA, the rest of these members of the selection committee hopefully it doesn't require it here, but I'm hoping they can have some input into developing the minimum specifications. They could advise as to, it's EPA's a member of this, GITA's a member of this, DPW and DOE are members of this, and that they could all advise the minimum specifications that we're hoping for here. I think that the very clear language that says we are going to award this contract to the responsible offerer who offers the lowest annual leaseback rate is also, it's crucial to this type of procurement, and it's hopefully going to give us the best value for the government of Guam. Our procurement code was designed, and its rules, by its construction, its purposes are stated to be to provide for increased public confidence. And I know the previous speaker said the public has lost confidence, and because of the need to keep repeating this process for Simon Sanchez, the length of time it has taken. Another one of the policies of the procurement code is to ensure the fair and equitable treatment of all persons who deal with the procurement system of Guam. And I think that reducing the variables, requiring the minimum specifications is also going to make it much fairer and much more equitable for those who are bidding on the project. And it should, the ultimate goal is to bring the fullest, to maximize to the fullest extent practicable the purchasing value of the public funds of Guam. And by encouraging competition, by specifying what we want, we can encourage competition exactly on those terms. And I'm hoping that's going to bring us the best value for the government. So I support this bill, and I thank the author for his efforts in clarifying all of these. I guess I would just ask if we could clarify the purpose of Exhibit A. It was attached to my bill. Is it supposed to be attached? Will Exhibit A be attached to this bill when we pass it?
Mr. Speaker, Exhibit A was provided just as information to clarify this issue about is what DOE provided considerations or specifications. And so it's really for information purposes only, because the law, Public Law 32-120 specifically says for an education facility that meets DOE's specifications. I would have some reservations about attaching this here, because if things should change and they want to pare it down, the law says you got to have these things, and subsequent discussions may find that, well, okay, as much as we would like to have that, we'll have to live with something less. And so that.
Thank you, Senator, and thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yes, so I guess it's a guide right now, but yeah, we're putting faith in DPW and DOE to work together quickly and to come up with specifications now. I can see that to be the only really reason for delay after this is that amount of time that it might take to put specs together. And I think DPW did say in testimony on one of these bills that, yeah, for them to put specs together would take so much time. And that's why they just put it as guidelines. But so I'm hoping that process won't take too long. I'm hoping that they've gone through it enough, and we've built so many schools recently that they can be very firm about what they want. I'm also commend the sponsor that separating the projects, and I totally understand that we need to ensure that we're able to repair the other schools, but I think that it is the best thing to do right now to separate those other projects with just the one school to get it done fastest, cheapest, and in time for the students. So I thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to the sponsor.
Thank you very much, Vice Speaker. Anybody else wish to be heard? Any other senator wish to be heard on the main motion? If not, Senator Addott, you're welcome to close. Oh, wait, Senator Espaldon.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I wasn't going to speak on it. However, based upon some of the comments and I think some of the things that my colleagues are thinking, is that this, if we pass it, this legislation, if we pass it, will replace what is right now being heard before the OPA. And in my conversation with the author of this bill, that's not the case. In essence, under the procurement law, when you have something like this, and there's a protest that is filed, everything is stayed. And in other words, everything stops until certain decisions are made by the OPA. And then after that, once that protest is filed and it's being heard by OPA, depending on her decision, there is the possibility also that the parties could then file, or those who probably did not win on the OPA's decision could then bring it to the Superior Court. So there is still a whole process to go through on this particular RFP that is in existence right now and is being challenged in front of the OPA. This bill does not replace it. It does not replace that RFP. Right? in my conversation with the author, while we were off on taking recess to discuss some of these issues, he even said this bill is more of what he termed an anticipatory bill, in anticipation that the existing RFP could possibly be canceled or pulled back by DPW, then this has the potential to then be used. And the reason why I'm trying to explain this is so that there's no false hope or there's no false expectations out there that once we pass this bill, that all of a sudden this is what replaces the current RFP out there. It doesn't. It doesn't. This is another mechanism should the existing RFP that's out there be withdrawn, then this becomes in effect. But until that point, the present and current RFP that is being challenged right now from the OPA is what is on the table. And that could still take time because the parties then, if they are not satisfied with the ruling of the OPA, then have another avenue to go to the court. And once they go to the court, depending on what the court decides, the lower court, there is that possibility of an appeal to a higher court. And so by voting on this bill, it does not expedite anything at this point. This is, like the author shared with me, an anticipatory piece of legislation that should the current RFP be pulled back, right, this is what would replace it. So I just want to make that clear so that there is no misunderstanding that if we pass this bill, this is what is going to govern starting, should the governor sign it. And so, again, this is not the magic bullet that will move this process along from where it's stalled right now. This is something in anticipation that should DPW withdraw the current RFP, this is what will then replace it. And I just needed to make that statement to make sure we all understand what this bill does. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you very much, Senator Espaldon. On the main motion, anybody else wish to be heard?
Mr. Speaker, may I ask for a 1-minute recess, please?
We're in recess. back on the record. In session. Madam Vice Speaker, have you had sufficient time? No, nothing else to add. On the main motion, any other senator wish to be heard? On the main motion, if not, the sponsor is invited to close.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. First of all, I want to thank my colleagues for their input. I think there was very good input, and it was very important. The gentleman from Tamuning was very, very on point when he indicated that Bill 58-34 is really anticipatory in nature. Anticipatory from the standpoint that see, how would you put it? Anticipatory from the standpoint that we don't know what DPW is going to do, if it's going to cancel this RFP, and if it does, certainly this tool would be available to them. We don't know how Adelup is going to receive this, but we cannot just sit here and wait until the winds have changed out there around us, and then we're going to say, okay, here's what we're going to do. I think we have a pretty clear picture of where we want to go. Now, what I anticipate doing is, if we do pass this bill, is that I'm hoping that the OPA will take a close look at this, and DPW will take a close look at it, and they'll say, well, that's an option that you may have, so you can either cancel it or we can go and sort this thing through. There's also that scenario where if a bidder does not prevail, they're going to take this thing for judicial review, and that's going to delay it further. We don't know whether the governor is going to veto this bill. But I think what's important, the bottom line is that we've got to do our part here and pass this bill and send it forward. And if the governor decides to veto it, well, we'll decide on what to do with that veto at the right time. If he decides to sign it into law, along with that comes that I presume he'll pick up the phone and he'll tell DPW, cancel that RFP. We're going to redo this whole thing. And so we've got to do our part, and we got to be anticipating these things. And so, that's probably the best we can do for now. For sure, by passing this bill, until certain other things happen, it really doesn't, it can't do anything. The question was raised about faith in the process, and I still have a lot of faith in our agencies that are trying to put this process together in the procurement law. But the fact that protests have been filed throughout this past 3 years, unfortunately, that's the protest feature is a self-policing feature in our Procurement Act, and we cannot say that these protests have been frivolous. So, for example, the latest protest is that the RFP is including the rehabilitation of 34 other schools in this current solicitation. And the public law that authorized that clearly says that until you have done a capital improvement plan, you cannot then you go and issue an RFP for the rehabilitation of the 34 schools. But that's not what's being done. Prior to that even being done, that's going to be included in the in this solicitation. So, if everybody just reads the law clearly, closely, and follows it, I think we can probably move forward. So I think we've certainly given it a lot of discussion. I believe that Bill 58-34 does provide that option that will in fact move the construction of Simon Sanchez off a dead center and move it forward to where it should be, and that is to start rebuilding that school. That doesn't eliminate the fact that you still have 34 other schools that are necessary to be rehabilitated. But then if we start doing the patintio, a little bit for Simon Sanchez, a little bit for there, we're going to end up with a situation where there's not enough for either of the two. So let's just kind of fix our focus right now on Simon Sanchez, get that done, and then we'll have to then address the other 34 schools as best as we can down the road. So I ask my colleagues to consider Bill 58 and support it. Thank you very much.
On the motion to send the bill down to the voting file, is there any objection? Hearing no objection, so ordered. I'm going to be calling a recess until tomorrow morning. I want to remind all of the members that we have all been invited by United to a presentation at their offices at 8 o'clock tomorrow morning. And we're scheduled to resume session at 10:30 tomorrow morning, at which time we'll address the two set-aside bills, one from Senator Muñe and one from myself. And hopefully after lunch, we'll be able to address the 4 resolutions and be finished with all the bills tomorrow so that the clerks and legal counsel can engross the bills for us to be able to vote sometime on late Thursday afternoon. At least that's what I'm hoping. We've also been invited by the nonprofit Congress Pizzuta to a forum in the committee room at 8 o'clock on Friday morning, where they will present to us and we will discuss with them some of their recommendations. We will have to be finished with that by 8:45 because the governor has called us into special session in 9 in the morning. So that's the schedule that I'm proposing that we have for the next couple of days. I think it's manageable, and I thank all of you for all the deliberation and the discussion over the last couple of days. But I think we've had a good session so far. Okay, so with that, unless there's any objection, I will call a recess until 10:30 tomorrow morning.